Hello and welcome to Addiction Truths, brought to you by Country Road Recovery Center. I'm your host, Pierce Rosengren. In this podcast series, we delve deep into the profound impact of addiction on families. We share insights, experiences, and advice on navigating this challenging journey. Before we begin, a general reminder to our valued listeners. While we deeply appreciate your engagement and encourage you to reach out with questions, comments, or concerns, please refrain from posting the names of family members who are currently in our program or who have been in the past. Your discretion helps us maintain the privacy and safety of all involved. We're here to offer support, answer questions, and build a community of understanding and healing. So let's start the conversation and bring some truths about addiction into the light.
And we're live. What's up, Derek?
What's up, Pierce? What's up, everybody?
It's good to be back. We've been on at least a month hiatus?
10, 12 weeks?
Yeah, well, as is the tradition of this podcast, we've had some technical difficulties with the computer that we were using, with the microphones that we're using, so we've upgraded our set a little bit with these little clip-on mics.
We're getting fancy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super fancy. I'm excited about it. To anybody that has joined us before, we're just going to have a conversation about what it's like to be a family member with somebody that's struggling with addiction. Derek and I know from our experience that sometimes the family can be, they can struggle just as much, if not more, than the person that's struggling. And so it's not always obvious in the same ways that it is with the person that's struggling with addiction, how the family members they also have their own.
Yeah, I don't even know if sometimes it's not even obvious to them that they're struggling as much as they are.
Yeah. Today we're going to be talking about the family rules, the different family rules. Maybe they're the obvious rules. Mm-hmm. Don't sneak out. Respect the house, clean up after yourself, pay your rent, whatever the case may be. And there may be some underlying rules that nobody has to talk about.
Yeah.
For example, loved one comes in drunk. The rule is to not talk to them and not engage with them.
Yeah, the unhealthy social norms that happen in a family culture, for sure.
Yeah. And they turn into cycles, or they come from, like I said, they're never discussed, but they come from oftentimes some pretty painful experiences.
Yeah.
But Derek, before we begin, how are you, buddy? We haven't gotten the opportunity to really check in with each other in a while.
I'm good. Life's good, bro.
Yeah. Anything new?
No, not really. I mean, nothing really changes when you're an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you tried to sell me your Jeep the other day.
Jeep Gladiator for sale if anybody's interested.
It's a really cool Gladiator too. I'm not a real big fan of the Jeep Gladiators, but this one is really cool. It's big, blue, huge wheels.
Yeah, I can use this as a platform to continue to try to sell my Jeep. I'm totally fine with that. No shame.
No shame. It's got some nice aftermarket shocks. I don't know. They look like they are aftermarket.
Lots of post-purchase.
They're huge. It looks like
upgrades.
We took a trip back when the eclipse
was
coming over Oklahoma.
Go see the eclipse.
Yeah, we took a trip out there. It was about an hour and a half drive or something like that. And maybe 5 minutes in, I knew. And I was sitting in the front seat.
Yeah.
And the bumpiness of the truck,
yeah.
I knew in 5 minutes, I was like, oh, dude, by the end of this trip, I'm going to be so motion sick.
I'm trying to sell it, man. You're not supposed to tell people the woes.
Well, I get motion sick.
It drives like a Jeep. It's supposed to drive like a Jeep.
It does that. And so at the end of I actually had to switch seats with our buddy Wyatt.
Yeah.
And climb in the back and lay down and close my eyes.
Yeah. Not everybody has the intestinal fortitude to be a Jeep owner.
I guess I don't. I'm more of a truck guy.
Just stick with your Prius.
My Prius. My Prius. Love that. One good thing about having a Prius is you get some nice gas mileage.
That's one of the reasons I'm trying to get out of the Jeep, man. The 45-mile commute every day is not easy on the pocketbook.
No, I'm sure it's not easy on that Jeep either. Just because that Jeep is not meant to be a commuter.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's meant to climb rocks.
Yeah, man. Summer's been good. So
fun.
Yeah.
Family doing well?
Family's great.
Great.
Yeah.
That's good to hear, man. That's good to hear. What's been your experience What's been your experience with family members coming into, because you've owned private practice, you've been in the industry for a long time, you've come across a lot of people struggling with addiction, a lot of families that want their loved ones to get better. What's kind of been your when you first meet a family, what's kind of your indicator that like there may be something a little bit deeper going on?
I mean, the honest truth is anytime family members end up in front of me in any professional capacity, there's probably a problem. You know, even families that are doing mostly the right things, are reasonably well adjusted and have some stability, when they have a family member that's in need of serious clinical services, residential drug and alcohol treatment, or even like crisis mental health treatment, that's just not an easy thing to experience. And so I think the fact that people are seeking help is an indicator that there's a bigger family systems problem at play, or something's happening. And one of the things that I tell family members routinely before somebody enters treatment, and again, whether that's drug and alcohol treatment, or sometimes, that's just treatment because maybe somebody's struggling with thoughts of suicide, maybe somebody's having some psychiatric issues and they need to be hospitalized for even 3, 5, 7 days, for psychiatric stabilization, is I always tell family members the best thing about that, the flip side of this is incredibly hard to do as a family, is I get some respite from the chaos, right? I know that my family member's safe. In the case of our facility, I know they're safe. I know they're not using. I know they've got a place to stay, a roof over their head, something to eat, and people that are there caring for them. I can not worry about that and try to get some interpersonal rest and do some things to kind of correct some of the unhealthy behaviors I have. If it's psychiatric care, one of the hardest things about dealing with family members that have serious emotional or psychiatric issues is just you're worried about their safety all the time. Well, if they're in crisis care, they're safe. It's a good opportunity to get some sleep and to not, especially moms, I think, tend to worry all night long when their young people are out using, or when young people, may or may not be safe. And they're safe. Take that opportunity initially and upfront to start getting some rest, because you've got a long road ahead in terms of creating some family change, and it's going to require some energy.
Yeah. I think, especially if somebody's coming to our program, if the loved one is coming to our program, the family can kind of sit back and say, you know what, I know they're going to be safe for 90 days.
Yeah.
A full 3 months.
Yeah.
That often can provide a lot of initial peace.
Yeah.
But then I think the initial peace may wear off. I know you know your loved one's in a safe place, but then what? You may start to recognize there's a little bit of underlying depression going on, a little bit of underlying anxiety of like, well, what are they going to do when they get out? What's going to happen? Are they going to be able to maintain long-term sobriety? Are they going to be able to get a job when they get out? What's their transportation situation look like? Are they going to be able to feed themselves when they get out? And I think those all stem from, just from my experience, those stem from a deeper issue.
Yeah.
Can you speak on that a little bit?
There's so many different, I think, talking about these things. Back when I was a younger and thinner man, we used to do a lot of low impact caving in Arkansas, where we'd crawl into little bitty tiny caves and see how big they got once you got inside of them.
Oh, you are.
It was so much
brave than I am.
It was so much fun, and now in my mid 40s, I look back and I'm like, that was dumb.
Have you seen those videos? Not to sidetrack us, but have you seen those videos of the guys that have a headlamp on? They've got a little rope trailing them so they know how to get back out. And they are army crawling, head tilted to the side, army crawling.
I've done it.
Those videos, man, they gave me so much anxiety.
Yeah, there were some that were so small that sometimes we had to take our helmets off and push them in front of us because they wouldn't go through. But there's a particular cave in Arkansas that once you get in, there's 40 or 50 small holes. It's like just Swiss cheese and you just pick one and go. And this conversation reminds me of that, right? Because when we start talking about family trends and rules, it's like, man, we could make left and right turns all over the place and have productive conversations, you know? So I think there's lots of things at play in unhealthy families. There's a lot of fear-based things that happen. There's a lot of shame-based things that happen. And there's each individual family member has their own set of character defects and emotional struggles. And all those things kind of combine to create this foundation of unhealthy family rules and patterns. So typical ones that I think we see a lot are even in fairly healthy and well-adjusted families. I think we see them a lot. We see lack of emotional vulnerability, where people don't feel safe to talk about what's going on with them emotionally, or lack of the right kinds of language to have those conversations. Like, I don't know how to say how I'm feeling, so I just won't talk about it. Right.
Right.
And so that's a big one, because I think even in my own family life and experience, there's patterns of, hey, we just don't talk about the stuff that's going wrong. It's almost like this kind of toxic positivity where it's like, hey, we're only going to focus on what's going right, focus on the positives, we'll ignore the rest. And most of the time when you ignore things don't get better, and so we see this like vulnerability that leads to like these common kind of unhealthy rules of don't talk. We don't talk about dad's drinking. We don't talk about this. I think that a lot of it's kind of tied together. Maybe it looks a little bit like a Venn diagram, or one thing's leading into the next, but we don't talk about things. And then so there's not really enough emotional intimacy to develop trust in our relationships. So we don't talk to each other, then we start to not trust each other, right? And then in families where patterns become really unhealthy, there's really this sense of we're not even allowed to feel. Like, no, you're not allowed to feel that way. Like,
you cannot feel hurt because of my drinking.
Yeah.
If you even express that you're feeling any pain, the emotional backlash that you get from that is
100%.
devastating.
Yeah. So it's almost like progressive. We go from this we don't talk to we don't trust to no, we don't even feel. We're not even going to feel that. We're going to bury things. And that's a lot of times where we see families, by the time somebody's needing, our level of care or having some serious problems, that's oftentimes what we see, I think.
Yeah. There was this thought I shared with a friend last night, and it was about our own healing journey, because we get sober, right? I got sober, but I realized that just in the initial of getting sober, that wasn't going to solve all of my problems.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still left with real world problems.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we talked about last night was one of the best tools of healing is honesty.
Yeah.
And that can be very, very difficult to cultivate.
Yeah.
Particularly when honesty has gotten you in trouble.
Yeah, I think that's the hard thing about honesty, right? Like, honesty is best and costly, right? Like, those are the two sides to that coin. I think what people don't understand is dishonesty is more costly, just not immediately.
Yeah.
Right.
That first, it could be a survival mechanism or something to protect me in that moment, to disengage anger, to disengage heavy emotion. And so it prevents the blow up initially.
Yeah.
But then there's the build up.
Yeah.
It's just one more lie stacking on top of one more lie.
Yeah. I mean, think about that in terms of just being emotionally vulnerable. It's like, I'm not going to be honest about how I'm feeling right now, which has a payoff in the moment, but is very costly the longer that goes on, because it builds resentment, it builds patterns of not being able to be intimate with your partner emotionally, and all of these things. And up front, honesty is costly. If I'm going to be honest about how I feel, it might cause a conflict, right? but the cost is short and not as severe as the cost of dishonesty in the long term, for sure. Yeah. But I think that a lot of times, even in my own life, that's why I'm dishonest. It's because like, I don't want to pay the price right now. The rest of it's future Derek's problem, you know? And unfortunately, I think that's our mentality with a lot of things. You know, that's our mentality with even, you know, in group today, we were talking about like the pace at which we want to change. Like, you know, you come in, you get sober on day 1, and on day 2, you want to work a 4-step, you know, and it's like, let's slow down a little bit, right? Like, this is going to take a long time, but we want the immediacy. And I think the same thing is true when we're dishonest, is I want the immediate relief that dishonesty provides. But in the long run, just like with change and just like with other things, it's going to come back around and really bite me.
It does.
Yeah.
Almost inevitably.
Yeah.
I have never told one significant lie without that significant lie coming back like a boomerang and cutting me up.
Yeah.
It does. It really does. Whether that be, you know, my loved one finds out about the lie, and then I'm labeled as dishonest. How could I be trusted again? And that's a heavy punishment. But then there's the more internal, where that lie actually disconnects me from my people.
Yeah.
It disconnects me from my circle.
Yeah.
And it disconnects me in a way that maybe I don't see right away. But when I get around them, I know underneath I'm hiding something.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be just as devastating as the emotional blow up that comes from, I mean, really even
it's exhausting. It's exhausting. We talk about this concept in some of my groups called emotional labor, which is the energy that we spend pretending we don't feel how we feel, right? Mm-hmm. The example that I love to use because it's silly is like when you go on a work lunch or work dinner and you have to like smile the whole time and pretend like you're enjoying it, and in the back of your head you're like, I want to stab you with a fork. Mm-hmm. I would never share a meal with you unless I'm being forced to in this situation, right? That's what we would call emotional energy. And the piece of that we don't talk about enough is the added emotional energy of secrecy and deceit, right? And how exhausting it is to carry the weight of your own deceptions around, constantly being worried about if they're going to find out, or what happens if they find out, or that like those anxious moments where you think somebody's about to say something and you're going to be outed and you're like, and all of that is just so emotionally exhausting that it prevents us from being as healthy as we can be, you know? Yeah. The similar thing is true. I don't know if you can relate to this or not, right? But it's like, if I'm driving around with expired insurance or an expired license, it's exhausting every time you see a police officer. You're like, and you're tense and your body feels it and your heart feels it. And all of that costs me time and energy, like on a soul level. And when I'm driving around and I know there's nothing in my car that's not supposed to be in there, and I know my driver's license is good, and I know my insurance is good, I don't have that worry. I don't have those fears. I don't expel that energy, and I can shift that energy into healthier, more emotionally adjusted things. Yes. So yeah, I think it all piles on top of us.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, one of the most common things that I get, one of the consequences that I experience when I'm dishonest is the idea that, man, if I'm not who I say I am, and that is so hurtful to my soul, to like who Pierce is. That thought of I'm not who I say I am because of the lies that I've told is so devastating to my confidence. It's so devastating to my self-esteem, especially if it's gone on for a longer period of time than a day. If I go to sleep and I think when I'm going to sleep, man, today wasn't a good day, I just don't feel like I am.
Let me ask you a follow-up question on that, because I find that really interesting that you brought that up. Is it more about the impact of feeling not congruent with yourself, or is there pieces of that are about the ego shot and reality check that's actually not who you are, is you're not honest. And I say that because I think even in my own life, it's so funny. We talked so much about this in group today. I do reflective readings at the beginning of all the groups that I do, just to kind of set a moment and give us something to think about, get our minds going. And the reflective reading that we did today, like, touched on this subject of the thing that I see, the things that I see in the world that I find most heinous, most ugly, most morally depraved, right, are almost always a reflection of things that are actually inside of me somewhere. Mm-hmm. And that reality, while painful, is there a piece of you that finds it really necessary to, like, right your ship in a way?
Yeah. I'll share a story in response to this. So there's a Stoic idea that I don't know what's positive for me and I don't know what's negative for me, because my mind is too finite to understand what's going to happen in the future. I can see into my past I can see retrospectively, and I can see, like, okay, this wasn't good for me, this was good for me. Well, what happens in the moment is I label things right away, negative or positive. Mm-hmm. And so this kind of is going along with what happens when I right my ship. And so when something is, particularly my addiction, when my addiction was happening, I did not see any positives in it. It was destroying my relationships with my family. Mm-hmm. It was destroying, I didn't have a job. I was completely unemployable. I really didn't know how I was ever going to get out of it. It seemed like it was just, I lived in the past, the present did not exist, and the future was not coming. And I was living constantly with this idea that I'll change tomorrow, but tomorrow was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Tomorrow was so long ago that it doesn't feel like it's ever going to happen for me, like I'm going to change. And in that is a lie that I'm telling myself, that I'm going to change tomorrow, that tomorrow isn't coming. And so what happened is that I jumped into recovery eventually. When the pain got so bad, I jumped into recovery. Mm-hmm. And now my addiction is one of the most beautiful tools that I have. The pain, my pain makes me worth my weight in gold today. My past experiences, my past pain is what allows me to do the job that I do so well. Yeah. It allows me to sit with folks like yourself, with other professionals, and talk about what recovery means in a deeper way than just a speculation. Yeah. And then also it allows me to sit down with that person that's still struggling and go, here's my experience. I can use the experience of my addiction today in a way, in a good way that I never expected. And so what was a negative in my past has now turned into one of the most beautiful blooming flowers that I could have ever imagined. Yeah. And there's another example. Last year on my birthday, I bought a car. Nicest car I've ever owned, right?
Prius.
Yeah, it's a beautiful Prius. Great gas mileage. No, it's not Prius. It's amazing car. It has a lot of trunk space for my drums. I can lay my seats down. It's safe for my kids. It drives itself, which is really cool. Kind of. The self-driving is not that great. It's 2017, but it's there. It has that automatic cruise control. Yeah. Where I can set cruise control and it'll see the cars in front of me and match their speed. Yeah. And I got this car and I was so excited about it. It was such a positive thing that day on my birthday. And I was really looking forward to driving it. And I pull off the lot. I don't know, about 2 hours after I pulled off the lot, the engine light came on. So I called the dealership and I said, hey, what's going on? What happened to the car? And he said, well, we just replaced the battery. And sometimes in those more advanced cars, there has to be a full computer reset to change, to write that. Right. Where you just reset the car all the way down to its factory settings. It understands that all that was a new battery coming in. And so we did that. We reset the computer and the car drove great for a little while and the engine light came back on. And so I took it back and they did it again. And then they told me, well, there's a couple sensors that are wrong, so let's replace those. So that was about $1,000. Yeah. And then the engine light came back on. And I was like, I'm not taking it to that dealer. I'm going to go take it to a Honda service place. Yeah. So I took it to a Honda dealership. And they said, yeah, your engine's going out. And so it was like $2,800 to fix the initial, what we thought was wrong. Yeah. And then the engine light came back on. I had to take it back and I had to get a full engine rebuild. And so now I'm about $7,000 in repairing this car.
Yeah.
And so what was at the time a very positive thing to happen in my life turned out, I can see retrospectively that there was a lot of negative consequences in a rational and in a very immediate decision that I need to go buy a car right now. There wasn't a lot of forethought in it when I did it. I just did it. I was like, you know what? I'm doing it today. It's my birthday.
Yeah.
And so I look back and I can see these areas of my life that they didn't go exactly the way that I planned them to.
Yeah.
And so what I do with dishonesty now, like I said, it is one of the greatest tools in my recovery, because what happens when I'm dishonest is I disconnect myself from God, I disconnect myself from my fellows, and I disconnect myself from my own recovery.
Yeah.
And I start to get in my head, and I start to feel all these things that we've already talked about. And what happens when I get honest with somebody? It completely changes. It almost immediately redirects my course and puts me back on the beam.
Yeah.
I get right back on the beam. And so that's, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but the ways that I've been taught now, when I do feel that disconnect within me, maybe there's something I need to look a little bit deeper at and get more honest with.
Yeah.
Because only if I'm honest can I bring that into the light. And I can bring it to somebody else and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing with this. This is what I've done. This is what happened to me. I don't know how realistically to solve this problem. All I know is that I'm just going to be honest with you about it.
Yeah.
And then in doing that, I allow myself to be helped, because if I'm not ever honest with anybody, they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know what's going on.
Right.
And they don't know how to help me.
Yeah.
But as soon as I'm honest, I can get somebody else's experience on that.
Yeah. All the same things are true, man, I think, for families. Like, there's a piece to family healing that requires families to have honest reflections of the reality that they're in. For families to be able to say and admit things are not okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not okay. Family's not okay. There are some unhealthy things at play. And so I think that honesty, like certainly from a recovering person's standpoint, becomes foundational. But I think it becomes foundational from the family standpoint as well, because it's the beginning. It's the reality check and the thing that breaks the delusion that they've got a problem with the family's okay. No, that's delusional thinking too. They've got a problem. We've all got a problem. Let's fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something else that is popping in. I'm going to get up real quick and grab my water.
Yeah.
Something else I've been thinking while we're having this conversation is oftentimes a more subtle and not so obvious problem in the family dichotomy, especially when it comes to my experience with my own family and my friends too. All of my personal relationships is sometimes I want them to do something, but I'm not going to tell them exactly what I want them to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to set the stage for them to do what I want them to do. And what I've learned about that is manipulation.
Yeah.
That is a way of controlling the people around me to get them to do what I want them to do. And and sometimes when that doesn't go my way, I get really hurt because like I can see, of course, with my all-knowing mind, with my infinite wisdom, I can see what I think is best for that person.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to set the stage for them to be successful in the vision that I have for them. And so maybe I tell them something that I don't tell them directly what I want them to do, but I tell them something that leads them down that path. And maybe I get disappointed. Maybe I don't. Have you had any experience with that?
Yeah. I think families manipulate in all kinds of ways, man. Setting stages is a great way that we see that play out. I think the biggest solution to that is again, honest, but also direct communication about what you need and what your expectations are. We don't talk enough about what our expectations are, what our needs are, what I need from you, giving you an opportunity to talk about what you need from me, and being honest on whether or not I can deliver on that, right? Like, it's one thing for me to communicate with my wife, hey, like, here's what I need from you in this relationship. It's totally different thing for my wife to communicate to me, hey, here's what I need for you, and me to have the honesty to say, I don't know if I can do that. Not in a way that's going to like break the relationship and things fall apart, but there are certainly things that we have margin for and things that we don't have margin for. And a lot of times what ends up creating conflicts in families on really basic levels are just people not owning the fact that they can't do something, right? Like, she says, hey, can you do this today? And I've got the day off. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. When in the back of my head, I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get that done. I've got so much else to do. Well, instead, I should have just communicated honestly at the beginning, hey, I don't know if I'm going to have time to do that or not, but if I do, but we're so people pleasy all the time in families that we just want to. We don't want to be dishonest, but that's the end game, right? When I'm not clear about something, that's really dishonesty. Dishonesty transcends whether or not I'm lying about something. It's so much bigger than that. There's dishonesty in my behavior. There's ways that I create patterns of dishonesty just by not telling people how I feel. All those things are wrapped up into that. And so, family manipulation happens all the time. Mm-hmm. And I've got to check. I think I've got to check my ego, and I've got to check my honesty, and just communicate directly with people. And especially about expectations is a big one that we see. What do we expect from family members? And I know there are lots of things in the field of psychology or counseling or health and wellness, especially in addiction, that there's tension, like both things are true at the same time, and they seem like they're opposites, but there's really just this tension between them. And this is one of those things. I'm trying to think of another example of here's another maybe recovery example. It's like, I actually regain power in my life by admitting powerlessness over chemicals. Like, that's a tension that doesn't make sense in my brain, but there's a tension, between it. And I think this is one of those things that, like, I've got to communicate my expectation with people, not because and that's where I was going with the tension thing, because there's a lot of people in recovery who are like, don't have expectations. Expectations are premeditated resentments, all of these things. And yes, I should temper my expectations of people and life and relationships because it helps me avoid pitfalls. But at the same time, we expect certain things from you as our director of outreach, right? Like, that's not an unhealthy thing to expect you to reach out to somebody when we ask you to, right? And so it's not as much that it's like these psychological expectations, but in families, we don't communicate those. And I end up being angry and resentful because an expectation wasn't met, but I didn't communicate that expectation. And now I'm the one that's angry about it, A really funny example of that is when I got married years and years ago for the first time. I grew up in a family where my dad worked, and then my mom kind of was the manager of things, right? She was the house GM. She paid the bills and she managed the checkbook and she did all that kind of stuff. My first wife grew up in an environment that was, her dad like worked and stuff, but he also managed everything. He was the GM. And so about 2.5 months into our marriage, we're living in this little duplex in Norman, and we happened to both be off on Mondays because of the jobs we had. Watching TV at 2:30 in the afternoon, all the lights go out. I'm like, well, that's weird. And I'm like, hey, did you pay the OG&E bill? And she's like, I thought you were supposed to pay the OG&E bill. We had never talked about any of that, right? Mm-hmm. I had an expectation that she was going to do it. She had an expectation that I was going to do it. And because that wasn't communicated, there was a problem, right? And it would have been silly for me to be angry because I never told her, I expect you to do this, right? And so I think a big part of what prevents manipulation is just kind of as families laying all of our cards out on the table and saying, hey, here's where I'm at with this. Like, I kind of, in my relationship with my spouse, I expect certain things. I have an expectation of honesty. I have an expectation of kindness, even in the midst of conflict, right? Some people aren't like that, right? I've got friends. I'm not quite sure how it works, but it works, right? And I think you see this on TV shows a lot. Like me and my wife don't like rag on each other like bros do, right? Like we treat each other with kindness and we say affirming things. Mm-hmm. I've got friends who are in relationships and they treat their wives and their wives treat them like I treat my buddies, like ragging on each other and teasing each other. And I'm like, that would never work in my relationship. It seems to work in theirs. But we have to communicate about that, because if one person thinks that something is working and it's not working for the other person, you end up with these really deep-seated resentments that cause you big-time problems in the future.
You're not talking about what our roles are going to be, what our expectations are of one another, and that can lead to kind of what we're talking about from the beginning, where it was never clarified what each other's gonna, the expectations for one another.
Yeah.
And so now we're so far down the resentments that now,
that sometimes it's irreversible, right? I actually had that experience. I'll talk about it vaguely. Some of it might still be a little fresh, actually. But I had that experience where I lost what I thought was a really valuable friendship, because I grew up in an environment with friends, with sports, small town, where guys treated each other with disrespect, almost as like a way of bonding. Does that make sense? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. The person that I had this friendship with, who was also a guy, but he didn't have that experience growing up, right? Culturally was from a very different scene. And so we had this friendship, and in my mind, I'm treating this person like I treat the people I care about mostly from a friendship level. But his interpretation of that, to be quite frank, was that I was being an asshole, right? And because we didn't communicate through any of that, it went on year after year after year until this person was like, no, I'm not going to be friends with you because you don't treat me with respect and you don't treat me like a friend.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I'm like, I treat you like I treat my best friends, right? Like something's missing here, right?
I love you very much.
100%. I take a bullet, would have taken a bullet for him, And so, but so much of that has to do with not feeling safe enough to be honest about what's actually happening in a relationship, and not communicating these expectations of behavior, right? And the reality is neither one of us were wrong, right? Neither one of us were wrong in how we were treating one another. Both of us were wrong in how we were communicating, because we weren't communicating, right? And it ended up costing us a 10 or 12 year friendship. And to the point that it was unreconcilable,
I'm that friend. It's funny because I'm that friend that does not take sarcasm well.
Yeah. And so you get it. Yeah, you get it.
I do get it. I see sarcasm as passive aggressive comments where you're saying one thing, but really underneath you mean something else.
Yeah.
And that's how I interpret sarcasm. And so I have friends that are very sarcastic, but I'm just upfront with them and I tell them, hey,
that doesn't work for me.
I don't do sarcasm well. And how I feel when you say something like that is I feel like you're making a passive-aggressive side comment to me. And typically when I do that with my friends, it might take a couple times of me saying,
change.
I don't feel right when you say something like that to me because I don't take sarcasm well. I put it back on me and I let them know it's nothing you're doing wrong necessarily. It's just the way it affects me is that I view you differently when you say things like that. And so it hurts my feelings. And so, right up front, typically when I come across somebody that is sarcastic and because I've gotten better at it, I can see it. And so I just like, hey, I'm just let you know up front, that's something that hurts my feelings, even though I know you don't mean to.
But that's a skill you probably had to learn.
It is a
because
skill
there were times where you didn't feel vulnerable enough to offer that up. And then you get into the development of resentments that are going to be relationship ending in the future. Yeah.
Especially in that common idea of an unexplained rule, or just an underlying rule that men are fairly sarcastic with each other. They make fun of each other, and that's a way of building companionship amongst the men. And it is,
but not for all men.
But not for all men.
But that's what we don't understand, right? Like, because my experience, through like culturally through my younger years was that it was all men, right? Because nobody had ever either felt safe enough to talk to me about it, right? Or weren't vulnerable enough to talk to me about it, whatever the case may have been, where to say like, hey, not everybody's like that. Like that might've been how you and where you grew up, that's how things were, but that's not everybody's case, Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a lot of things on both sides of that I think people have to learn to communicate things. And
One thing I've been thinking about while we've been talking is like, and you said it just a second ago, you alluded to it. You said you had to learn that. And the way that I learned that was rubbing sandpaper on sandpaper, really, to get to that point where I was ready to talk about it. But another thing was I had people in my life that I was willing to talk to about it.
Yeah.
And so it was a third party where I talked to them about it. And so I think step one in the 12 steps is admitting that we're powerless and our lives have become unmanageable. Mm-hmm. And what that means to me is that I have to be honest with myself and say that I don't have any power of controlling this. Yeah. This isn't something that I have any power of controlling. And whenever I do try to control it, my life becomes increasingly unmanageable. And part of that means if I'm powerless, I've got to go find the power. I've got to go find somebody that can help me find the power that is going to restore me to sanity. Yeah. And so one of the things I have learned in my experience is that oftentimes it's harder for family members to accept that maybe they even have a problem.
Yeah,
and I think it's not so clear for family members.
Yeah, that's the flip side of that coin is you had to learn through experience to communicate that, right? The same thing is true for people that are on the flip side of that relationship, right? I had to learn from that experience that the way that I can treat one person is not always the right way to treat everyone.
Yeah.
And that not all relationships are built on that weird dynamic, which is it's a weird dynamic, and so there were character defects in my own life related to what do relationships really look like, right? Because a lot of times men do that as a way of masking vulnerabilities because it's easier to build friendships in that weird dynamic of picking on each other and being sarcastic. That's way more emotionally safe than looking at somebody and saying like, man, I really value you. Right. And so the flip side of that is for those of us that have my background and have grown up in my experiences, learning how to unmask ourselves and be comfortable just telling someone, hey, you really mean a lot to me. I don't need to be sarcastic or say anything stupid or make a joke about you. I just need to tell you that you're meaningful to me. Right. And be okay with that kind of emotional vulnerability that we never have been, right? So there's a lot of things that everybody in relationships needs to be able to get honest about and say like, hey, it's a character defect, maybe that I personalize everything. Hey, it's a character defect that I can't just tell somebody how I feel. I've got to make a joke about how I feel because it feels safer, right? Mm-hmm. And then the beautiful thing about programs of recovery or programs of change, even for people who aren't in recovery from addiction and alcoholism, we're all still messed up, right? But the beautiful thing about recovery is it gives you opportunity to identify those things and create new patterns of being that are just much healthier.
Yeah. So for somebody that's struggling with addiction, the question, how does somebody recover? Well, maybe they get therapy, or maybe they go to an outpatient program, or maybe it's so severe that they go into a residential treatment program like Country Road.
Yeah.
But that's not so obvious with family. Family doesn't have an opportunity to go into a residential treatment program to learn what good coping mechanisms are, what bad coping mechanisms.
Can you imagine how chaotic a treatment center would be that housed families?
Oh, man, I've heard of some.
Oh, that would be wild.
Yeah.
That would be wild. Yeah, I think, I've got some friends that I've had this conversation with recently who have children who are struggling with different things, right? Even as adults. And one thing I told them is that, and I've heard my mom say it about our family at times, that especially for moms, the unfortunate reality is, as a mother, you're only as happy as your happiest or as your saddest child. Right? If you've got a child that's really hurting, mom is only as happy as that kid. Right? And the same principle is at play for families as a whole. Families are only as healthy as their unhealthiest member. And so I think maybe we can demystify how families change by just saying it's about change on an individual level. I can't do much to change the unhealthy patterns in my family, but I can do a lot to change me, right? And I can do a lot to change unhealthy things that I do, to change my own character defects, to learn to be more vulnerable myself, right?
Yeah.
And if every person in a family is committed to that, the family is going to get infinitely healthier. Even if you're the only person in the family committed to that, the family's going to get healthier because you're going to get healthier. And at a minimum, you're going to have a better capacity to deal with all the other family's crap, right? The goal would be for all family members to work on individual change together. But the other thing that happens is one family member begins to do it, they motivate and spur on other family members to work on themselves too. So yeah, you can do family therapy and you can do some of those things that are going to help, but the way to throw gasoline on the fire of getting your family healthier is to focus on you and what you need to do different. And if everybody does that, it's going to happen pretty quick.
And throwing it on there means to accelerate.
Yeah,
the growth
to expedite the process.
Yeah.
I used to say that when I would do marriage counseling in my private practice, and I would have couples come in. I would say, hey, we can come in and sit down, and you can talk about her and everything that she needs to fix, and you can talk about him and everything he needs to fix, and you're going to make a tiny bit of progress week to week. But if you want to make a bunch of progress week to week, you need to come in here and talk about you and what you need to fix, and you need to come in here and talk about you and what you need to fix. Own your own stuff, focus on that, and you guys will change much faster.
If I am not the problem, there is no solution.
That's right.
If I cannot recognize myself as the problem, if I cannot recognize where I have been wrong, if I cannot recognize where I can make it right, and I continuously, because all I have control of is this body that's sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
There's this mind, and I don't even have full control over my mind.
Or your body, really. I mean,
I have thoughts that come into my head that I don't feel like are of me, know, and that's just part of being a human. We have intrusive thoughts. But what I mean by that is I certainly can control the way that I react. I have somebody, I have somebody in my life that I love very much, but they really get under my skin. And so what I had to do one day, and this served as a really good practice for me, and I'll explain why. I wrote down on a piece of paper the personal boundaries that I will keep, that I will keep when I interact with that person. Yeah. It meant, and some of the examples of that were no screaming, no yelling, no cussing, no throwing anything, no attacks on their character, no. Those are the main ones. Yeah, those are my main. Yep. When I'm talking with that person, that is my main. no visible anger. And so, and what that one means for me, that I don't say anything out of anger. And when I get to that point where I'm angry, the boundary that I have with myself is that I separate.
Yeah.
And so what happened to me and why it's so powerful, that after I put it down on paper, it was like embedded in my mind, the boundaries that I have to keep. And so when something would come up, when a situation would arise, and I started to notice, and I'm not perfect at it. I'm not perfect at keeping these boundaries. These, particularly of the raising my voice.
Yeah.
That's one that's really easy to do. I'm frustrated. I feel like I have a right to be frustrated. That person is doing the thing that I deem frustrating to me, and that I feel like is attack on me. And so I feel like I have the right to be angry. And part of me being angry is I get a louder voice. I start to yell. And so but I noticed one time when I began to get angry, I thought back to that piece of paper that I wrote on about all my boundaries. I said, I'm crossing one of my boundaries. I didn't write the paper and say, these are the boundaries that I'm not going to let them cross. Right. Although that can be very helpful. This was a very personal to me. I'm not going to cross these boundaries. Yeah. And what that did was it gave me back control over how I interact with that person.
Yeah.
And we have a relationship that is getting better and better and better every day.
Yeah.
Because when those moments pop up, I'm not focused on them. I'm focused on the things that I can change.
Yeah.
I'm focused on the fact that I'm not going to yell in this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything that's going to be hurtful to them. And what's happened is the relationship has gotten better inevitably because I'm working on me.
Yeah. You know? I think one of the beautiful gifts that the program of recovery gives people, even people like me that are just find a lot of value in recovery outside of drug and alcohol problems, is that idea of acceptance. And one of the things that we have to accept more than anything is the very small amount of control we have in our own lives.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got ultimate control over the choices that I make, how I communicate, how I feel with people, what I do with what's happening to myself emotionally and cognitively. I only have some control over what's happening to me emotionally and cognitively because I have intrusive thoughts. I have feelings I don't like. I can't choose not to feel that way. I have control over what I do with it. Yeah. I only have some control over my body because I don't control whether or not I get diarrhea or cancer or any of those things, you know. And then outside of that, you might have some control of like financial control and control over your home. You get to pick your furniture and that kind of stuff, right? But even ultimate control in any of those areas is impossible. My home could be gone in a tornado like that. You know, I don't think that we're at any risk of this, right? It's happened to me at jobs in the past, though. I could come into work tomorrow and find out that the owners have sold the facility to a national healthcare conglomeration and everybody's gone. Zero employee retention. That I don't even have control over my finances at that point, right? Yeah. You know, so the key is operating where I do have control. What do I do with what I'm feeling? What do I do with what I'm thinking? How am I communicating with the people in my life? What kind of choices am I making in spite of what I'm experiencing? And that's where we have to put all of our eggs. Put all your eggs in that basket because the rest of it can change, you know, in an instant.
Yeah, and I certainly celebrate the people that can figure this out on their own, that can fix these problems on their own, these problems with their own choices, with their own behaviors, with their own coping mechanisms, with their own ability to separate themselves from situations that make them uncomfortable. I celebrate people that can do that on their own. That is not common. And what I've
super rare, even for people outside of drug and alcohol related issues. I couldn't figure that out on my own.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us in this month's podcast. The video was cut short due to some technical errors, but to wrap up the video, I want to let everybody know I'm going to be posting our phone number my direct line and the facility's phone number in the comment section. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to get connected. I'm happy to get anybody connected to the resources they may need. Whether you are a family member that does not struggle with addiction, that would like to get connected with some kind of therapy or a recovery program of some kind, I'd be happy to do that. And if you do have a loved one that is struggling with addiction and you think they may need services that we provide here at Country Road or addiction services in general, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to get you connected to the right resources. Until next time, I hope everybody has a great month and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.